One of the biggest myths in Christianity that I've heard so many times when someone's going through hard times, and they say it in such good intentions. Someone gets a terrible diagnosis, or someone, lost their job, or someone's having a hard time with a family member, whatever it is that's going on. And they say this, that God's never going to give you anything that you aren't able to handle. That's a myth. That's some serious misinformation. That there's a lot of times life is too hard to handle and that we can't do it without Jesus. And so this idea that God's never going to give you anything that's too hard to handle, first and foremost, most of the stuff that you're dealing with isn't caused by God. If you're being honest with yourself, a lot of the problems that you're facing right now are problems that were caused by you or the people that are around you. But let's get to the point. One of the myths that we see in our faith is that somehow God is, out there working and doing the things, and everything that happens in our life, that he's doing it to test us or to tempt us or to frustrate us to see if we really love him. It's just not true. And so when people say those sorts of things, I know that they mean well. And what they're trying to say in that moment is that you've got this because God's got your back. But they're not really saying that, right? They're saying if you can't do this, then there must be something wrong with you. At least that's what they're not saying. And oftentimes we can get really stuck on moments like that. In Numbers chapter 11, 13 and 14, we find Moses, and he's trying to feed the children of Israel. Now, this is a time where they've been in exile. If you didn't know this already, the book of Numbers, the book of Leviticus, and the book of Exodus, they sort of run parallel to each other. And for the most part, they're telling the same story, just from a different perspective. In the book of Numbers, Moses is with the children of Israel, and he's trying to find meat for them, and everybody's complaining and frustrated. And he says, they keep saying to me, he's crying out to God, give me meat. How am I supposed to find meat for all of these people? I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. I don't know about you, but if Moses couldn't do it, what makes you think that I could do it? Of course there's going to be situations and circumstances in this life that are too hard for you to carry all by yourself. In 1 Corinthians, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul writes to the church at Corinth, chapter 10, verse 13, God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide you a way out. This is probably the verse that most people are misquoting or maybe are recalling from memory when they say that God's not going to give you anything that you can't handle or more than you can bear. And what they're doing is they're talking about God not giving you a way to escape your temptation, but in reality, the circumstances and the consequences of the choices that we make are still a reality in the life that we live. I mean, if you go out and you get hammered and you get behind the wheel of a car and you get a DUI, there's going to be consequences for that DUI. A judge is going to give you a sentence that might include jail time, especially it will include a fine. And then if something horrific happened in the process of that, you're going to have to carry that with you for the rest of your life. Now, God forgives and God restores broken lives, and his grace is sufficient for all of us, but the truth of the matter is that there still are earthly consequences for our actions. And so the idea that, well, God's not going to let anything happen to you that's too much for you, sometimes there's such a thing as the gift of too much. Listen to me now. I know that's hard to go, wow, I must be really gifted then because there's too much happening in my life already. When I say the gift of too much, I don't mean too much money or too much success or too much joy or too much beautiful things in your life. I'm talking about the gift of too much, like too much pressure, too much pain, too much suffering, too much hard times. Sometimes it's actually a blessing to recognize that enough is enough and that I can't do this by myself. Numbers chapter 11, verse 15 through 17. We keep reading, talking about Moses as he's trying to figure out how to feed the people of Israel as they're in exile, as they're traveling to the promised land. When there's no meat, how am I going to feed all of these people? And listen to what God says to him about all of it. He says, bring me 70 of Israel's elders, and I will take of the spirit that is in you and put it on them, and they can help you carry the burden of the people so that you do not have to carry it alone. Now, in in Exodus, we find, Moses actually having this conversation, very similar conversation with his father-in-law, Jethro. And Jethro says, you can't do this all by yourself. You need to organize teams. The gift of it being too much pushes you to a place where you can find other people to help you. In fact, sometimes too much teaches us some powerful things. I'm going to give you 3 things that too much can teach you today if you're taking notes. Too much teaches you sometimes that you have to put something down. You can't carry it all by yourself, and perhaps it wasn't yours to carry anyway. A few weeks back, I read you this passage, Luke chapter 10, verses 41 and 42, when Jesus is talking to Mary and Martha, and he's went to their house to have a meal, and Martha's been running around trying to make sure that everything's perfect. And Jesus says to her, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but one thing is needed. Mary has chose what's better, and it won't be taken from her. In other words, Martha, put down the rag that you're cleaning with, put down the serving tray, and just come and be with me. You're trying to do too much, and relationships are more important than tasks. Tasks are important, but relationships are powerful. Too much teaches you to say or instead of and. So many times in our life, we need to learn to just say or. We say and way too much. I got to do this and this and this and this and this. And no, at some point in your life, you're going to have to learn to say no to something that might be okay and good so that you can say yes to something that's even better. Sometimes we have to make small sacrifices in the here and now so that we can have a larger blessing in the future. So we say no now so that we can say yes later. Even though it might bring us temporary happiness, go back to last week's sermon, we say no to the temporary happiness because we want the joy of what's coming. Not only does too much teach us to put something down, but too much teaches us that it's okay to hand something off. In Exodus chapter 18, 17, and 18, we see Moses, and we hear this, what you're doing is not good. This is the same parallel passage that we read from Numbers 11. What you're doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. You need help. You need help doing some of this stuff. You weren't meant to. You weren't designed. You're not supposed to. If you keep reading in Exodus chapter 18, 22, and 23, that will make your load lighter because you'll share it with others. You'll be able to stand the strain of all these people, and you'll go home satisfied. He says, if you hand off, if you delegate, if you give away some of the responsibility. This is super important, by the way, that delegation or handing off of some of the authority and handing off some of the tasks will really help you to get stuff done. But let me give you just a little side note when you're thinking about delegation. I know a lot of times in leadership, we think about this, whether we're parents or we have influence in our community or we're leaders in the workplace or at the church or wherever it is that we're leading and that we're leveraging our influence to bring help and hope to people. That's what a leader's supposed to be doing. When you're a leader, oftentimes you think that now that you've arrived at this place of leadership that you shouldn't have to do the hard stuff anymore because you did that for years. And so you delegate all the stuff that you don't want to do. And my challenge for you right now in this moment is that while that's true, that is one of the gifts of leadership, it's also true that you should be delegating all the things that other people could perhaps do better than you, not just the stuff that you don't want to do. And when you delegate tasks, you can delegate responsibility, you can delegate the task, and you can delegate the authority. But the responsibility is always going to be firmly attached to you and I as the leader. And so while we want to develop and disciple great leaders, that's important. We're responsible for those people that God's entrusted to us. Let them carry the weight of the work, and you can still keep an eye on the responsibility. This is a powerful tool for us as leaders. it gives us the ability to not have to do it all. We say, well, instead of me trying to do this and this and this and this, I'm going to simply worry about doing the things that only I can do, and I'm going to find some people to hand it off to. Or I'm going to maybe just say no. Did you know that it's okay to say no? You can say no. That not right now. This isn't good for me. In light of what's happening in my life right now, it's best for me to say no. So when we talk about this idea of God not giving you more than you can handle, what we're really talking about is sometimes the trials of too much are not just teaching you to put something down or to hand something off, but sometimes it's pushing you to this place where you have to give it to God. In Psalm 55, verse 22, it says to cast all your cares on the Lord because he will sustain you. I love the ancient text when I look at this. If you look at that word cast, it's in the ancient text, it is this interesting word that is so much more than just, like to let go of. It's sackcloth, and it's this idea to hurl or to throw. Like with great distance and intensity, to hurl and throw all of your worry, your fear, your pain, your shame, your garbage that you've been carrying for far too long because it's all too much, to throw it to Jesus and that he will carry it for you. Yeah, some things you need to let go of and put down. Some things you can hand off to other people. But there are some things like the hurt from your past. There are some things like the stress that you're feeling right now. There's some things like the worry that wakes you up at night that you can only go to Jesus with. And you can cast all your cares on him because he cares for you. That's what he's there for. That's why we don't derive our happiness based off what's happening. We talked about that last week. But we derive joy in knowing that Jesus is there to help me through every situation and circumstance. 2 Corinthians 12:9. But God said to me, the Apostle Paul speaking, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in your weakness. You don't have to carry it all. You don't have to do it all. And so the next time someone says to you that God's going to never give you something that's too big for you to handle, you can honestly look them right in the face and say, thank you for that encouraging word, but also know that some things in life aren't meant for you to handle by yourself. And that's why we have family. And that's why we have friends. And that's why we have this thing that we call the church. And that's why we have God himself walking alongside of us, keeping in step with the Spirit. That's why Jesus took the burden of sin and shame and debt, and he died with it on the cross so that you don't have to carry it. Because some things, they are just too much for you. They're too much for me. They were too much for Moses. They were too much for Elijah. They were too much for David. They were too much for Peter. They were too much for so many of the people that we look to in Scripture. And yet Jesus was the one who was able to carry them all. You do not have to do it alone. It's okay for you to not be okay. It's okay for you to stop and set it down and ask for help and hand it off. You should be asking God to carry some of the weight, because you can't do it all by yourself. If there's one thing you heard me say today, I want you to hear this. Maybe for you, it's time for you to say no. Maybe for you, it's time for you to say or instead of and. Maybe for you today, it's time for you to say, Jesus, please carry this because it's too much for me, and I've been carrying it for far too long. I wasn't meant to carry this for all these years. And whether that's a burden from your past, or maybe something that you caused to happen, maybe something that was thrust upon you or happened to you, let go of it and let God give you strength and courage and the boldness to walk in all the plans and purposes that he has for you. And I know it's easy to turn the Word of God into some synthesized platitude, like God's never going to let you live in hard times and he only wants you to be happy. But in reality is that life isn't always happy and hard times are a reality. But the good news is you don't have to carry it all by yourself. That Jesus is here for you to throw those burdens on his shoulders and let him carry you all the way through.
Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us here at Hope at Home. I am so glad you're here today. Pastor Eric has an incredible sermon for you today. And I'm so glad that no matter where we are in the world, we can come together and learn a little more about Christ, learn a little bit more about who we are as Christ followers, and most importantly, find community with one another online.